Hello. Hey, friends. We are going to hang out for, I guess, at least 6 more minutes before we get going. Hey, Adam. It's good to see you. Well, I can't see you, but it's good to see your little avatar. Adam, I don't know if it was you, but I feel like last time I was doing a workshop, I played kalimba, and everyone was like, "This sounds like the love theme from Avatar," and I learned it. So if it wasn't you, then you're still going to hear it. But if it was you, then hey, I learned it for you, and we'll just say that it was. I don't know. Yes. Good to see you as well. But yeah, I'm in general pretty psyched. I am pumped because this is very much like more off script than a lot of workshops. I think historically a lot of MLH workshops have been like pretty on the rails, and we heard that a lot of people really enjoy just kind of hanging out with an MLHer and shooting the breeze. And I really enjoy that too. Like that's like my favorite part of workshops is just kind of chatting, before and after and during. So we do have a theme here today. We will be looking at databases and specifically like exploring this idea of why do I actually want a database, and exploring why that's like a confusing question. But it's pretty open-ended, and we will, kind of just be messing around. We will build a little pseudonymous chat app, which is going to be fun. We'll assign random usernames like Whack Corgi and Anarchist Spoder and stuff like that. So it should be good. I'm glad you think hanging out with MLHers is fun. But yeah, we will just kind of hang out. I don't know, for the next like 3, 4, 5 minutes, and then we'll get going. This isn't like a horribly long challenge. Hello, Igor Brands. Glad to have you. Oh, I'm touched. I'm so happy. I mean, in general, I think sleep schedules are really important, but I do appreciate that you stayed up for me. Yeah, it means a lot. It's fun. I feel like the first like many workshops I did ended up being very like, I mean like almost for lack of a better word, anonymous. But now it's like I feel like most times people come back that I know, and that's fun. Mostly you, Adam. You're fan number one. Friendo in chief. Yes. We will have music. We will have databases. We will have tea in a very cute MLH mug. Look at that. Adorable. Mm. What was it? I guess it was a week ago. My boyfriend had some extra hair dye, and he was like, "Hey, like I'm not going to use this, but if you wanted to put this in your hair, you could." And I was like, "Hey, why not?" So about a week ago, I put in half a bottle of hair dye or hair bleach. I don't know what it is, and I don't know if you've ever dyed your hair. There's this weird, like, you get drunk with power when you realize I can just decide my hair is going to be another color and like make it happen. And so I did that, and then I liked it so much that I said I want to go even brighter, and so I dyed it again. Yeah, I am not blonde. Well, I guess I am now. Yeah. Oh, thank you for the mug compliment. Yeah. This is one of the older mugs that I've had because I regularly have to purge my mugs. Oh yeah, but great plug for the Insta. Find me at W Liffert, which I will put on the screen later. I don't know. It's not super consistent, the Insta game, but I take pictures of coffee, maybe. I guess that's what I do. I don't really. This is like the big thing is people ask to follow me on social when I do workshops, and I have to like make it very clear that I don't post tech stuff on social media. You're like welcome to come for the coffee pics, but there will not be. I don't know. I guess occasionally there's tech stuff, but not a lot of it. If you want tech stuff, you have to come here, right here, right here. I don't know. Does it say? Oh yeah, right here to MLH Live. Oh y'all, I'm so bad at this. Yes, Adam, I did appreciate the story deluge. There was you were not kidding. There's a lot of stories. I'm very jealous of seeing people who are like in areas that have public health standards and therefore can go outside. That's really great for y'all, and I'm very jealous. Oh no, they sent you back. That's rough. But I mean, it's good. If we got to do it, it's good. Alrighty. So I guess we'll kind of get started and hop into things. Like I said, this is not super structured. Here, let's do that. And it should be a good time. But first, introduction. My name is Will. I am a okay. So I need to stay on in order to have my mic work. I guess I could probably configure that, but thank you for bearing with. Okay, we figured it out. We're golden. I just want full screen, not my face. The only full screen you'll see is this, and we'll probably do split screen a lot. But yeah, we're off to a great start already. My name is Will. I'm a coach at Major League Hacking. I work full-time at Google as a software engineer. I work on Google Cloud. If you have questions about that, sometimes people are like, what's it like at Google? Down to talk about that kind of at the end. We can do an open-ended Q&A. I am a Python enthusiast. I'm a Pythonista. I love me some Python. And I think databases are confusing, quite frankly. And we're going to dive into why that is. I think a lot of times when people talk about databases or show you their new shiny database, their database like exists to solve a particular problem, and they assume that you have already had that problem that they are solving. And especially if you're like a college student, you usually haven't had that specific problem. Like maybe you've had other problems, but the one that they're solving with their database is like not one you're familiar with. So databases can be confusing, but not because databases themselves actually are confusing. So this is kind of the setup. What we're going to do today is we're going to start with an app we want to build, and we're going to build it without a database. Or we're going to walk through a build of it without a database. And then we're going to see if any problems arise. And when they do arise, and I'll tell you that they will, then we will see how a database can actually help solve that problem. So here is kind of the pitch. And I'll say, like, throw questions you have in the chat. I will be monitoring and answering them. This is an open dialogue. You are super welcome to, I'll give you a link so you can follow along and actually code with me and spin up your own chat app. But you don't have to. You can just kind of watch. But I will say, if you are here, then you definitely should sign up for this workshop. If you register at this link, I mean, you should because you're here, and it helps us to know that you're here. But you can also get notified of other cool workshops like this if you do that. If you're already registered, then that's great. No worries. Anyway, I digress. So we're going to walk through this database, or walk through this app. I'll kind of tell you about the premise for it. We'll ask any questions. I'll actually run through some code really quickly, and then I will share the code with everyone so we can all get it up and running and see if we have any problems. Adam, no worries. If you do not want to mess up your new laptop. Now you shouldn't actually. You can follow along all of this just in your browser. I will send you if you've heard of Replit, we'll send you a Replit link, but no pressure. So here's my basic idea for an app I want to build. I want to have a basic browser-based chat app. I want anybody to be able to go to this website and type in a little message. And the only thing I want them to enter in is a message. Then when they send in a message, I want to, based on their IP address, assign them a random username. And then we'll display kind of when the message was posted, the username, and the message text. We want to see kind of all the recent messages, but we don't care about keeping like a forever backlog. So maybe we say we want to show the most recent 100 messages. This is kind of the idea. Do we have any questions? Any questions about why we want this or what our app is going to do? Okay. Just some broad kind of signposting here. The next little bit, I'm actually going to dive into some code that I have already written. I'll show you how I run it locally, but then we will all together grab the code and head to the cloud and use Replit to kind of hack on it and see if we have any issues. Alrighty, so without further ado, I am going to share my screen again. Boom. 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 And I'm going to pull over my app. Just another kind of signpost here. This workshop does use Python HTML, CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript. Hopefully, most of this should be pretty understandable. If you have questions about, you don't need to know Python or be a Python pro for this to make sense. And so if you have any questions about what anything means, then I can help walk through it. I will say, if you have the cutoff line, I'd say, is if you have never heard of a function before, then it might be a little bit a bit much to learn in one sitting. But if you have, written hello world, if you've written a function in any language, not necessarily JavaScript or Python, if you've written hello world in C++ or in Java or any of these languages, then you should be able to keep up. So without further ado, let's dive in. And I'm going to bump this up. Is this a comfortable size for everyone? I know streaming and sharing your screen is kind of a cluster cuss. Okay, fine, Adam. Yes, Lambda functions count. I don't know what you want from me. Excellent. Brown sugar cinnamon. I appreciate the confirmation. Then we will continue on. So this is a Python file. We can see in the left hand here, app.py. At the very top here, we have some import statements. These are basically just chunks of code that we are going to be using that we didn't write. This is outside code that we're pulling in. This app equals flask.flask statement right here. This is really just giving us an instance of a Flask app. What a Flask app does, if you're unfamiliar, basically just takes a web request in. So you can go search for a URL or put a URL into your browser. Flask basically gets that URL and then hands it off to code that you write. And then you can return what web page should show up. Let's see. Flask confuses me more than APIs did before local update build. Adam, does that mean that now Flask is less confusing to you? Because that would be a great thing to hear. If it is still confusing, hopefully this will be a good refresher. But so basically Flask does, it says, when someone asks for this URL, run this function and give them the output, right? So if you can write a function, you can return a web page. That's kind of the whole idea. This right here is, we're defining what is called a double-ended queue. That is a deck. Python has this neat little data structure that basically just says, I will keep a list of 100 things. And when you try to add the 101st thing, I will kick out the first thing, right? So you'll keep adding things and we'll just keep the 100 most recent ones. So remember, I mentioned I want to store at least the last 100 messages. And so this is like a really nice thing to do that. Oh, I said 100, but the comment says 10. Let's see. Does Flask do the same thing that Django could do? Yes, this is a great question. Yeah, okay. Quick little detour to talk about Flask versus Django. So Django and Flask both do basically the same thing. The difference is kind of a philosophical one. Django is the catchphrase is batteries included. So if you put in Django, then everything's going to kind of be there. It comes with kind of database functionality. It comes with all these other utilities. Whereas with Flask, you pull in those things yourself. So I like Flask because it doesn't have any of the extra stuff. And if I want to add something, I have to think about, okay, now I'm adding this. As we'll see, Flask doesn't have a built-in database, but we can add one later. So this is a great question. Yeah, Flask and Django basically do the same thing. Flask is batteries not included, and Django is batteries included. This is actually, if you'll indulge me, I remember it's similar to the theme of this little challenge here, is when I was learning Django, there were things that confused me just because it was doing magic behind the scenes, right? It was doing extra work for me, but I didn't fully understand or appreciate the work it was doing. So I think Django is great. And if you know Django well, that's super powerful. But for me, it was super helpful to learn on Flask. Oh, Adam says he understands APIs now, but he had never heard of Flask before. There we go. That makes sense. Okay, so jumping back to code. We have some import statements that just pull in code we'll use later. We create ourselves a Flask app, and then we have this queue, which basically just means first in, first out, right? So the first message we add, once we've added 100 more messages, that first message number 1, is the first to get kicked out when we add message 101. And so that's something we can refer to. If we scroll down, we see app.route. And actually, you know what? I was debating what order to share things in, but I think actually, would it be helpful if I share the code right now so y'all can follow along with me on GitHub? I don't know if anybody says yes, I can drop the GitHub link. Otherwise, I'll drop it in a second after I kind of get done with the code review. So then we have this this thing called @app.route. And if you've written a little bit of Python, this might be confusing. This is what's called a Python decorator. And we won't get too deep into decorators. They're kind of advanced, but basically it gives Python kind of extra information about how to use this function. And namely, this tells Python that when we want this function to be run whenever somebody hits the root path for a URL. We can see normally we are expecting a GET request, which is just an HTTP request saying I want to get information. But we will also accept a POST request, which is basically posting new information to the server. And basically this decorator says whenever someone asks for that root URL, run this function and return what this function returns. Yes, okay, I'm going to try to pronounce the username. Is it Resta? Oh, I know I got that. I know I got that horrid. Yes, I will. Currently, my plan, unless anybody is like, I would like to GitHub now, I will kind of walk through this. Then I'll share the replit so we can all create our own instances of the chat app, and we can play around with it. And actually, I'm going to see if we can break it. Halfway through adding a database, I'm going to see who can just like destroy my server. Because there are lots of ways. We'll look at SQL injection and other fun games you can play. But yeah, we'll do a little bit more looking at what the app currently does, and then I will share it with all of y'all. Adam, I would be honored if I am able to evangelize Flask to you. So I'm gonna repeat this one more time just to hammer it home. When our app is running, when you request that root URL, right? So you could say IP address and then /, or you could say, mydomain.com /. It's just going to run this function and then return whatever the return statement returns, which we'll look at a second. So this is over this index function. What we do in the index function first is we just check to see if our current method is a post method. I mentioned this earlier, but post just means we're making a web request and we're adding new information. So like one example of this is if you are on Facebook and you are uploading a photo, or you're creating a new, actually Twitter is a good example. You're on Twitter and you're creating a tweet, and you're on on the web browser. When you hit return, that is a post request to send data into the Twitter database. A GET request would just be like loading up Twitter or loading up Facebook, or even like a Google search would be considered a GET request, because primarily you're asking for information. So if we have a post request, this is going to be for when someone is submitting a new message to our chat app. We're going to first get their IP address, which we can look at down below. And once we have their IP address, we are going to grab the message from the form they filled out. We're going to generate a username based on their IP address. And then we're actually going to generate a custom user color for them. And then we're going to call this, on all of that input, we're going to call insert new message. Right now, our insert new message function looks pretty simple. We just append it to our messages deck. So just to kind of walk through the flow here, is a user is going to send us a post request with their IP address and their message. We are going to use their IP address to generate a new username for them, or generate a username for them. Then we're going to add their message, their username, and this custom color we generated for them. We're going to add that to our queue that keeps the 100 most recent messages. Then at the very end, so we do that work just if we got a post request. But at the very end, regardless of whether it was a GET request or a POST request, we just send them a static HTML file that is called index.html, which we will look at in just a second. The one other kind of big important message or function we'll look at in here is this message data function. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I can hide that for you, Adam. For you, I'll do it. So we'll take a quick look at this message data function. So similar to above, we have a decorator that says whenever somebody asks for our domain /messages, run this function and give them the output. And this actually isn't going to return an HTML file. It's just going to return a JSON object. So this is basically like an API endpoint that we can hit. And so we'll look at this in a second, but our HTML file actually has some JavaScript in it that will be hitting this endpoint to pull down all the messages. If you have never dealt with kind of I guess AJAX is kind of the word for it, asynchronous JavaScript in XML or something like that. If you've never seen that, it's a little bit of a weird thing to wrap your head around. But the big thing is we're just going to send them, when someone hits this endpoint, we will just send them a JSON object, or basically like a dictionary of all the most recent messages. We will pop into this function. We have insert new message. And this we looked at earlier. We're just appending it. Right now, we're just appending the username, color, and text into our messages, and we're adding a creation time. Let's see, we have a question. What do you mean by pull down message? Yeah, it's a little bit vague right now, but I will actually, I'll walk through that in just a second. Basically what will happen is when you load the HTML file, it's actually going to be blank. It will show you actually, this would be helpful if I just spun up an example instance of it. So I'm going to run it locally so you can actually see what happens. When you load it, it's actually not going to show you any messages. And then as soon as it loads, there's JavaScript that is going to go back to the server, ask for all the messages, and display them on the web page. So this is a little bit of a fine point here. Adam, great question. Yes. So oftentimes, if you're working with Flask, you will have lots of different files. You will actually import different functions. You'll have like a router, so you'll have multiple Python files. You'll abstract away kind of like your model logic. Like you might put I'm just kind of ranting here, but you could put like all of this stuff in a different file. You might have a big thing in Flask is templating, right? So you might have a dozen different templates. I specifically, in order to try to make this simple, have kept it, frankly, as simple as I can. Really, there are two files you have to care about, app.py and index.html, which we'll hop into the HTML in a second. But yeah, I think it's awesome to understand that you really can build a really, really simple app with Flask. So I'm actually now, in order to understand what the HTML is doing, I'm actually going to spin up a local instance of this server. So y'all will actually not be able to hit because I'm running this locally, you won't be able to interact with this. In a second, I'll spin up one in the cloud so you can all see it and play with it. But right now, we'll just look at it locally. So I'm going to go to, let's see, 2021-03-databases. I guess I can show y'all. We're doing it live, so I can show y'all my my terminal here. Actually, I will full screen this for now. So what we'll do is we are going to. This is a little bit of a tangent, but we're going to use a virtual environment, which I've already set up. No, it is. Let's see what's in here. Okay, yeah. So this is just a command that basically says I have a special set of dependencies that I just want to have be around for this project. So instead of all my normal libraries in my computer for Python, I'm just using a special set of them that's in this virtual environment. But we're not here to talk about virtual environments. But we'll source that. Oh, env bin activate. And now we will just, all we'll do is we'll say Python 3 source, oh no, just app.py. Boom, we just run our app. Yes, my computer's name is Bertrand, named after Bertrand Russell, the philosopher and mathematician, and party boy. He was all these things. So one thing I'll touch on is that when I run Python 3 app.py, this is just a standard way of running a Python program. But what actually happens, yes, Adam, I did say party. You and Bertrand Russell would get along. What happens is all of this stuff runs, and at the very bottom of this file, we have this statement that says, if name equals main. And basically what this is saying is if we're invoking the script directly. So the difference here is that if we imported this script into another file, this if statement would return false, or this condition would return false, and we wouldn't run it. But when we invoke this file directly with Python 3 space app.py, like we just did in the terminal right here, it actually executes that code and runs our app. So now we have a little development server running. So I'm going to grab this, and I'm just going to, in my browser, actually, I will go to localhost 5000. Boom. Oh yeah, I didn't mention it, but this chat app is named Turnip. Don't ask why. Hi CJ, welcome. Excited to have you here. Thank you for playing along with our databases workshop. Challenge? I don't know. So this is our little demo. So I'm going to, as we're looking at this, actually hop into the index.html. So this is what actually gets returned when you this is what actually returns. This is the HTML file that returns when you request just the root directory, right? So you remember I put a / right there. This is the kind of this is our domain name sort of, and a / just says give me the index, and this is what returns. And we can actually look at the HTML here. So the first thing that I do is I import. This is Bootstrap CSS. Which you're familiar with Bootstrap. It is just a package of stylings that makes a lot of styling just a little bit easier, a little bit faster. We have this overall container here. Inside there, we have our little header that says turnip, but you could change this to whatever you want. And then we have a form. So you can see this form right here is this right here. So this whole text box and post button, this is inside our form. We talked about earlier methods, and so this has a post method, and it submits back to that just root path. This is just kind of our input elements, and then we have a button that allows you to submit. We won't go too deep into that, but this just allows you to submit your form back to the original endpoint there. And then we have this empty messages container, right? If we actually go back to our app here, if I inspect and we open this up and we look at the container, you can see the div for messages container is just empty. And what actually happens is once we add a message, we have this function down here called load messages that is every 5 seconds going to check to see if there are new messages and add them to our view. So I can throw a message up there that says, "Hi, Michelle, how's it going?" Oh, no. Oh, this is off to a horrid start. Okay, let's see what's going on. We're doing it live, friends. We're doing it live. Okay, while I worry about this, okay, we get to do some fun debugging together, which honestly I'm thrilled with. We get to take a deep dive. But we have a question: what happens if you just load the HTML file? Yeah, great question. I'd imagine it just displays the text and form and button without any functionality. Yeah, you are. I would guess that you are right. I wonder, can we just drag this? Will it show it to me? Sweet. Okay, yeah. So if we do this and we hit return, oh, that's interesting. That's not safe. But yeah, it doesn't have any real functionality. So there you go. Let's see. Is the function load message part JavaScript? Yes. Great question. And all of this down at the bottom here in the script tag is JavaScript. So there's a little bit of JavaScript. We won't go too deep into it because this workshop is not about JavaScript. But I mean, if you have questions, we can look into it. But basically, what it says is the load messages function goes and does a GET request to the messages endpoint. Which, if you remember, that is the other function we had, the message data function. And then it just grabs the messages container and adds all of those new messages to that container. And then the last thing that we do is we set a timeout, and we basically say that every 5 seconds, or basically once we finish loading messages, wait 5 seconds and load again. This is milliseconds, so 5,000 is 5 seconds. And so we say, load all the messages, wait 5 seconds, and load them again. I'll also say I am not a JavaScript pro. This JavaScript works. There's lots of better ways to do lots of the things that I'm showing you here. But as Adam mentioned, we're doing this to prioritize kind of speed and kind of making it streamlined and simple. So there's a lot that we won't get too deep into. Okay, so we got an internal server error, which is great, which I'm thrilled by. We can see inside app.py, an insert new message, username, get username, request IP address. Request IP address is not defined. So let's go to our app, and it says request IP address is not defined. Did we get a line number? In line 30. Great. I love Python error messages. Okay. Oh, excellent. Okay, so we right here, I did a refactor earlier, and we see get username of request IP address, and we're actually getting request IP address all the way up here. And so what we actually want to do is actually right here, we're passing in username. So we're getting our request IP address, and then we're just passing the output of get username to username, and we're passing the output of get color to color. And so down here, because we're passing them in this insert new messages function, we can actually just take that username argument we're passing in and use that, and take that color we're passing in and pass that in. So that was due to a refactor. Now, in order to get those new changes to load, we can kill our server and start it up again. So we are going to go back to our root directory, and we'll say, hi, Michelle, how's it going? Sweet, look at that. Now, you may have a question, where is this whack corgi username coming from? And that is our function when we say get username. This is like actually a fun bit of code that I will show you. But so we call get username, which is, it's Michelle Obama, Adam. Come on, get with it. It's always Michelle Obama. We will use get username. Oh no, you can't hear me? The worst thing is that hello. The worst thing is these get immortalized on the Twitch. Let's see, Adam and or Sashithreta, are you hearing me now? Okay, well, just let me know if something whack happens. Let me make sure everything is plugged in. I don't want to leave y'all hanging. Maybe can I turn on closed captioning? I don't know. We'll see. StreamYard's acting up for me today. So as I said, I sent a message to Michelle Obama because I'm hoping that because I was hoping that Michelle was going to be on the chat. Oh, okay. Everybody could hear me. Oh, okay. Sweet. Love that. So the bit of code, we generate this username. Back in our code, we get the client IP address, and that's a function that we do down here, but that's kind of unimportant. Assume we're just able to get the client IP address. It works. And And then we use get username and get color, and we pass in the IP address. So what do we do in there? In get username, we take the request IP address. Hash is a function that basically takes whatever input you give it, mashes it up, and turns it into a very long number. This is actually a great security measure. It means that once you hash something, you cannot go backwards and find out what was hashed. So I don't want to be leaking people's IP addresses, and so I hash them to get this kind of thing that is based on, it's unique based on their IP address. Every time you pass in an IP address, you'll get the same hash out, but you can't go from the IP hash back. Oh, thank you for the compliment on my ASMR. I hope this is soothing for everyone. So we get an IP address. Y'all, I'm all over the place today. As I said, off script, doing it live. We grab this IP address, and we basically use that hash to randomly select, based on the IP address, an adjective and an animal. We will then format that adjective and an animal as the username and send it back. We do a similar thing for color. We hash their IP address, and we use that hash to randomly select a hex code here. And so that is where whack corgi is coming from. Now, if I send another message, I could say hello and post it. Sweet. Now, something that you'll notice is that all of these have the same username because they're all coming from my IP address, right? But once we put this online, we'll be getting different client IP addresses, and we'll see different usernames. Let's see. I think that actually is about the whole sort of walkthrough, which is exciting. Which means I now can kind of drop the code, and we can play along with it live. So what we're going to do, we're going to leave the safety of our local environment. Oh, actually, one thing I'm going to do first is, because I made a change, I made a quick little bug fix that everyone saw there. I made this part work because I had refactored it and left a bug in there. I am actually going to go in here. I'm going to kill my development environment, or kill my dev server. I'm going to git add app.py because we have a few changes. I'm going to git commit. If you're not familiar with Git, don't worry. This is just me saving my work and uploading it to the cloud. We'll git commit with the message bug fix in app.py after refactor, and then I will git push, which will send my code up onto my GitHub, which is a great segue to go check out my GitHub. Boom. So we can go to github.com/wliffert/turnip, and I will post that link in here. It's a pretty sparse repository. I can walk through everything for y'all, but there's not much to see. We have a git ignore file that just tells Git to ignore some silly like artifact files that get generated. That is .git ignore. It just says Git, don't pay attention to these. Adam, it wasn't going to be a font plug, but now it is. Y'all, I made a font and it's on GitHub. You can go to github.com/wliffert/paragon, and you can download my font. It wasn't gonna be a font plug, but if you would like to use my font, you are more than welcome to. That's git ignore. .replit we'll actually use later. It hooks us up to this kind of fun development cloud service called Replit. README is just a bit of documentation that generates this thing you're seeing right here. It just gives us a title, a little description, and then it gives us this fun run on Replit button. We see our app, we see our index.html, and then requirements.txt just tells us what Python files we need. Let's see, ballistic supernova. Yes. This will be great actually to do a short recap. So our goal is to build this pseudonymous chat app where people will join, which we'll actually see this chat app in practice in a second. People will join, they'll be able to submit messages, and they'll get assigned a sort of random username to use based on their IP address, and we can all chat along together. We're currently building that without a database, and we are going to see if we have any problems that a database could solve. So we're going to actually find the problem first and then use a database as a solution. A kind of the quick run through to the code we're having right now is the two important files here are app.py and index.html. If we pop into app.py, which we can see we just made a change to 2 minutes ago. Here, let me make this bigger. Here is a kind of a super quick run through of this Flask file. So what Flask is it lets you define a function that says when a user asks for this URL, give them this return. We import some other libraries we can use. We have our Flask app right here. We store the most recent 100 messages. And when we try to add message 101, we delete the old one. And then this is basically our controller function that says when a user asks for just /, then you should run this function and then send them at the very end will return this index.html file. The other endpoint we have is when a user asks for all the messages we've stored, you run this function and just return to them some data. That is kind of the long and short of this file with a lot of things kind of abstracted away. And then the one other important file we have is our index.html, which is the file we return when someone requests our chat app. All of the actual HTML is up here. Basically, we just define a form so people can submit messages. And then we have this empty messages container. And what happens when our HTML file loads is actually all of this JavaScript at the bottom runs. And it actually goes and requests all the messages and then adds them to our HTML. So down here, you can actually see load messages runs every 5 minutes, and it appends all of our messages to our messages container, which if you scroll back up, messages container is right here. Any questions? We can kind of dive further into the recap, but pretty soon I'm going to launch this app. Adam asked, is app.route a Flask thing? Yes. App.route is one way you can actually see this is if we go back to app.py, we import Flask, we create a Flask app, and we call it app. And then we're actually on app. We're doing that. That is our Flask app. We're saying .route. So we are using this. It's called a decorator, and we're telling our Flask app, hey, you should care about this function because you're going to use it later. That's app.route. Hopefully that was a passable kind of recap of everything. But if you have any questions, ask them. Yes, I can dive into this. Yeah, actually, great thing to go back over. I went over that pretty quickly. And in a second, we will actually run this thing and we can all message on it together. So back in the app.py file, was I just there? Did I just click back to it again? I think I did. When someone sends us a message, they're going to use the post request. And we're going to get client IP address. We can click into this function. It should show us, boom. Yeah, so it's in the same file. We define get client IP address. We could dive deeper into like the way you send HTTP requests or the way kind of the web works. But suffice it to say, when you send a request to a website, they have your IP address because they have to have the address to send the response to, right? And so when you make a request, we are able to just say, get the remote address. This whole little thing right here, the reason we have to do this dance is sometimes the network you're behind will actually swap out IP addresses. And if it's done this swapping, which sometimes happens, you have to ask specifically for where it was forwarded from. But in either way, we're returning the IP address that we get from. Up here, once we have gotten that IP address, we call get username and get color. These are two functions that we've defined at the very bottom that use the IP address to come up with these fun usernames. So the first thing we do is hash the IP address. Hashing is like a really deep topic, but basically the idea of hashing is you can think of it kind of like actually like a hasher, like a grinder, where you put in some input that is like looks like something, and you get out just kind of seemingly random number. The important thing is that every time you put in the same input, every time we put in the same IP address, we'll get the same number out. That's like the important thing. A very simple form of a hash that you can think of is if you have a string, you can transform each of those characters into like an ASCII number, right? So like each letter has a number, and you could just add all those numbers together, right? That's not a very good hash because it's not impossible to kind of like try to figure out what got put in. There are lots of problems with that as a hash, but it basically is a hash. It's kind of a one-way function that gives you a number based on some input. So this just gives us a random number, or a random number that will always get the same number when we put in the same IP address. Then we just use that random number to select an adjective and to select an animal from these lists. And then we just add the adjective and the animal and return it. We do a similar thing with a color. Is we take that IP hash, we basically use it to select a random color for the user. But the important thing is with the hash function, we'll always get the same color for the same user. This is fun. So let's see. We have a question: is the app.route used in a similar way while using React npm package? Yes, it is. This is a tricky question because Flask and React are like a deep rabbit hole we could fall down, and what they do that's the same and what they do that's different. But at least the idea of routing and knowing this endpoint is going to get sent here, it is the same idea. Yeah. Let's see. Ballistic Supernova, what module is used for hashing? This is a great question. So actually, hash is a native Python function. It is part of the standard library. So we actually don't have to import hash. It is available to us in the same way that the print function is available to us, and we don't have to import print in Python. Hashing is kind of that important for so many things that that Python gives it to us for free without importing it. But that's a great question. Okay, so without further ado, which maybe other folks have already done this. I'll turn down my development server. I'm going to click this button, run on Replit. Now, when you click run on Replit, lots of things happen. This service called Replit grabs all the code from the GitHub repository, starts installing it, and actually attempts to run it. Let's see, try reloading the page, get back to coding. Okay. Replit's having a little bit of trouble. But the great thing about Replit is that it gives us a sort of shared environment that all of us have access to the same packages and the same operating system and all of that stuff. And so you can actually right now go and click run on Replit and basically have your own instance of this thing. All right, let's see. So we have over here all of our files, just like we saw in our GitHub repo. In our shell, we can run commands, and then we have a preview of our markdown here, which is great. This is actually what the .replit file is for. This is basically the run command for this repository. So if we press run, it goes into Replit and says what command is inside run and runs that. I think this should work, but we might have to do some more debugging because we're doing it live, off script. Let's see. Adam asked, can I click run on Replit from your GitHub repo? Yes, you can. Yeah, you can make a copy of mine and have your own instance of this chat app and play along. So this is like a great way that if you have a browser, you can code along with me, which is an awesome thing. So we're going to try running. Uh-oh. Okay, maybe I messed up the .replit file. Maybe that needs some work. But if I copy this command over, and pop it in my shell. Boom, here we go. So the thing that I will then show is, first of all, in our terminal here, we are actually seeing that every 5 seconds, we're getting another GET request to messages, which is exactly what we would expect, right? Because this client is supposed to be requesting every 5 seconds for new messages. I can say, hello. And now I'm anarchist floof. And that shows up. The other thing that is exciting is I can grab this. This is a URL kind of on the internet. I can pop it into here. I can actually use a VPN to connect through another IP address. So this is going to basically change my IP address to some IP address from Colombia. And now if I type, hello, anarchist floof, I show up as Happy Doggo because I was coming from a different IP address. But now if I turn off my VPN and I say, hello, Happy Doggo. Okay, this is Replit waking up again. So Replit is great because it is free. It is not great because as a free thing, it cannot be like the beefiest thing ever. So sometimes you get fun messages like it's waking up. Let's see if this is still working for me. And if I say, hello, Happy Doggo. Still's waking up. Okay, answering some questions while REPL wakes up. What did you do to run it? I can walk through that in a second. There's a question, where is the GitHub code? Yes, let me post my GitHub again. Where is my GitHub? I already navigated away. It is GitHub/wliffert/turnip. So everybody who's playing along can go to GitHub and just click run on Replit. And you can create your very own Replit. Replit's taking a while. Maybe we could refresh. Or we could kill it and try to restart the server. Adam, you should not have. It should actually, like, the intent was actually to post this in a second, so everybody can join in. But let's see how. Can we just kill it? Oh no, is it not accepting my my interrupt? I'm gonna try. Okay, so Replit got a little bit weirded out, but this is good because I can actually walk through this step again. If you open up this .replit here, you can actually grab this command right here, and inside turnip. In fact, actually, maybe something we could try is don't copy that first part. Just copy python3.app. And the cool thing is this is like exactly what it looked like in our on our local host, right? So I could say hello post. Hey, okay, yeah. So this is fun, as I can throw this and everybody can go to my little web server here, and we can have a conversation. So if anybody else wants to hop on, you can grab that link and you can join the conversation. Oh, Lit Corgi joined the chat. So this is it, right? This is fun. Adam says this is how catfishing works. No, don't use this app to catfish anybody. Just say hello. Garlic fries are delicious. Garlic fries are very similar to fried potatoes with some salt and garlic. Oh, we got BB Bun, we got Lit Corgi, we got Small Doggo, we got BB Kato. BB Kato is Sachi. So this is the idea. This is the app in action. And you can see actually as we have more people join, we have more requests to get messages because everybody every 5 seconds is trying to hit it. And actually, to be totally frank, like if we wanted to actually run this, we might. Well, there are lots of things we change, but in order to not overload our server, we might change that to say reload every 10 seconds. But this is our whole app in like 2 files and this free Replit service. We have our little chat app up and running, and I'm seeing it here, but we could just as easily join it from here. We can see all of our friends. Now, let's say that I think actually 100 messages is just a lot, right? We're not even going to hit that. Let's say I just want to test out, can we hit the limit? And so I'm going to want to go to app.py, and I can actually just change this max length to like, let's say I only want to store the most recent 5, right? But in order to get that change, I need to turn off the server and restart it, right? And then I can start it again. And this, my friends, this is the problem. We restarted the server because we had a change we wanted to make, and all of our old messages are gone, right? And people, and someone has a new username. All of this is not exactly what we want, right? Like ideally, I would want to be able to make some changes to the server and send it up. There are a host of reasons why the server might have problems, or it might just get restarted. I might have to bring it down for maintenance. But it's kind of inconvenient to lose all of that data, right? And this is when I'm going to take like a moment to step back and kind of pontificate. I mentioned earlier that databases often feel confusing, but it's not because databases are confusing. It's because each database is designed to solve specific problems, and if you have never faced that problem, then you have no clue. You can't understand why you'd want a database. So this is the process of like finding a problem, which is when we turn off our server, we lose all our data. That's just because when a Python program ends, it doesn't naturally store anything, right? Like you could write logs or something, but unless you do that, it doesn't store anything. There are lots of other problems that databases are designed to solve, but this is like a really simple basic one, is that you use a database to just keep data around, right? That you want to be able to turn off a server and turn it back on and have it still have access to all of those messages. So without further ado, let's dive into making a database happen. This is kind of part 2 where we actually build a database, and this actually is probably going to be a little bit faster. Look at Adam getting in on the self promo game as well. Alrighty. This is a moment that I want to take just to pause and see, does anybody have any questions? Is anybody lost? Is there anything else we can review? Any questions about what's going on here? Ooh, okay, yeah, good call. Actually, we can do a little kalimba break. So, for anybody uninitiated, this is a kalimba. It's a really fun instrument, and it's really easy to play. And I will perform some for you now. That was the love theme from Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is on kalimba. And I will play it again for you at the end, so stick around. Oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. You were too kind. You're too kind. So this was part one. We have our app up and running, and it has broken in a very particular way that we can use a database to fix. The problem is when we turn off our server, we lose all our data. And if we store our data in a database, if we turn off our server, we will not lose our data. That's the whole selling point for this application of a database. Let's see. Adam says that sounds like Minecraft music. Oh yeah, there's a lot of kalimba in a lot of the Minecraft soundtrack. Yes, making connections. I know like 3 songs on kalimba, so don't push me, but I am happy to perform for y'all. Okay, so if we have any questions about kalimbas or about what we have just seen, the app that we were able to build and the problem that it currently has, I would say speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay, cool. Lord of all babies, what question do we have? A kalimba. Yes, this is a kalimba. If we had to make a sort of personal chat, could you also explain towards the end? Okay, it seems like there are 2 questions here. One is if you have a personal question that like you don't want to put out in the public chat, the big option I would say is actually hit me up on LinkedIn. That is kind of where I am easiest to reach in terms of answering questions from workshops. I'm also on the MLH Discord, so if you join that, you can hit me up as well. But probably your best bet is LinkedIn. That is kind of where I put all of post-workshop questions. But if there's a question that is like personal about me, I'm happy to answer that at the end. We can do a little bit of a Q&A. Yeah, if it's like question about Google or about things that are unrelated to this workshop, I'm happy to field those questions. A personal, if you want to make a personal chat app, not a personal question, this makes a lot more sense. Yes, yeah, we can talk about that kind of thing near the end. Absolutely. Let's see. Quantum Bolt, what is your username on LinkedIn? I will share that at the end, so stick around to get access to my LinkedIn. How about that? Okay, cool. Thank you, Stephen. I love my MLH mug. It's my favorite. It's one of my longest surviving mugs because, I go through mugs a lot. Okay, so I am going to kill this server because we have just identified that when we take down the server and we spin it back up, we lose all of our messages. So we are going to set to work implementing a database. Boom. I'm clicking on things that you can't see. So when I say boom, I'm doing stuff, but I'm not showing you, just FYI. All right. So there are lots of databases. We mentioned this, and actually, like probably I should dedicate a second to talking about different kinds of databases. But I don't think I will. Broadly, we have two main word clouds of databases. We have what we call relational databases, and we have what we call non-relational databases. These are funky words, but I'm going to give you kind of two words to represent them. When we talk about a relational database, really what we're talking about is, honestly, it's an Excel spreadsheet, right? This is what it looks like. It's like a table. It has rows and it has columns. That is a relational database. Each table will have like a name. It will represent something. So in our case, we might make a table that's titled messages or message. And then each row will represent an individual record. In this case, we might say, each row is a message, and it has, our username, our user color, the text of the message. These are the things that would be in our relational database. Relational databases, like the big one is SQL or SQL, but most people pronounce it SQL. There are different flavors of SQL. So like at Google, I use a flavor of SQL called Google SQL, but there is also MySQL, there's SQLite, There's Postgres is a SQL database. That is relational databases. And for a long time, that's kind of when you said database, that is what people meant, is a database was a relational database. The other kind of database that especially recently has become very popular is called a non-relational database. And the big word here is, well, two words, three words actually. You can think of it like, if you're familiar with Python, it's like just a giant dictionary. But the buzzword here is key value pair. So most non-relational databases just act on basically a bunch of key value pairs, and you can have lists of things, but for the most part, you might have like key is a username, and then the value is all of that user's messages. Say that would be a great use case for a non-relational database. There are a lot of kind of finer points here. There are lots of other reasons that these two kinds of databases are good. But one thing that people often say is that relational databases are very performant, and non-relational databases are very flexible. So often, if you don't know exactly what you want, a non-relational database gives you a lot of flexibility. But oftentimes, a relational database is going to be a lot more performant or run faster. Sachi, I was saving that until the end as a treat. You can't just dox me here. Nobody click on my LinkedIn until the end. If you message me or request a connection before this workshop is over, I will not accept it. So you have to wait. Oh, no worries. I didn't make that clear. I'm not upset. You're fine. But be here now. Hang out with me. Let's see. We have a question. Where does Access Database come into this? You say, I'm Mr. Microsoft. Yeah, Adam, you're also not allowed to message me until the end, even if you've already connected with me on LinkedIn. Any message I receive in the next hour, I'm just going to ignore. The ones I received after this hour, I might ignore too, but that'll be an accident. Let's see. Where does Access Database come in? I need a clarification on what you mean by Access Database. There's like lots of ideas surrounding like database permissions, and a lot of that stuff actually we will not dive into. This is going to be a really high level view of databases, but if there is something specific, you can dive in. Yes, Adam, 4 a.m. robust. No, I will try to answer your messages whenever you send them, but alrighty. Okay, Adam, I'm sorry. I'm Mr. Not Microsoft. What is Microsoft Access? Let's see. Okay. If we have any other questions, we can dive into those. Otherwise, let's add a database. Well, if Microsoft Access is a really bad database, then I wouldn't have heard of it. I wouldn't have heard of it. I haven't heard of even most of the good databases. So, All right. So for starters, the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to import a new library. SQLite. Oh yeah, so relational, non-relational. Do we have any other questions about relational and non-relational databases? Relational databases are just like tables. They're like an Excel spreadsheet. They are sometimes not super flexible, but they're pretty fast. And non-relational databases are like key value pairs or like a giant JSON dictionary. They are usually pretty flexible, but oftentimes are not the fastest, depending on what you want to do. That's not always true. Underneath the relational database cloud, the big player is SQL. There are different kinds of SQL. SQL stands for Structured Query Language, which is pretty vague. And one kind of SQL is called SQLite. SQLite is a really, really awesome database for prototyping with. It is basically SQL. It has most of the features of most SQL flavors. But the awesome thing is that a SQL database or a SQLite database exists in just one single file. There's just one little file, and if you move that file, you've moved your entire database. That's all you need to run your database. We had this question, Firebase is a non-relational database. That is totally correct, yeah. Firebase sometimes gets called a key value store, but yes, that is a great example of a non-relational database. So in order to actually start playing around with SQLite, there is a really great function, or really great library in Python called SQLite 3. It's just the third version of SQLite. SQLite is great. They made a sequel to it, and then they made another sequel. And so we have SQLite 3. That was a good pun. Y'all should appreciate that pun. So that will import all of the functions and utilities we need to deal with SQLite. Oh my goodness. Thank you for telling me that I was not sharing my screen. I totally forgot. Okay, so here we are. We're importing SQLite 3. Thank you. Yes, thank you for asking. This is our statement here. And this is actually what I would say, follow along so you can update this so we can all have it together. I will kind of show my work at the end so you can catch up, but if you'd like to kind of build the thing as well, kind of join in. So we're importing SQLite. The next thing we want to do is, earlier I mentioned that SQLite can exist in a single file. Well, a lot of fancy databases, you need like a whole other program running to manage your database. You might have like directories of stuff to manage. The SQLite is just a single file. What we're going to do is we're actually going to make a constant, which is kind of a joke because constants aren't a thing in Python. Called default path. And this is just a way of building up whatever path the app is in, whatever directory the app is in, inside that directory, we'll just do database.sqlite3. That'll be the name of our database. Great. Then we're going to define another kind of global variable here called message columns. So remember earlier I said we're going to have a relational database is basically like a table, and that table or an Excel spreadsheet. And that Excel spreadsheet has columns. Each of those columns has a name, and each row is like a record in that database. As Adam voiced, if you have trouble both seeing what I'm doing and having space to program yourself, don't worry too much. You can jump back and forth. I'll try to take it slow, but I will also share my code at the end. So it's not the end of the world if you want to kind of go back and check up. So we have our message columns. So the first column will be an ID. The second column will be a username. The third column will be a color. The fourth column will be the creation time, and the last column will be the actual text of the message. Any questions about here? We just have a default path of where the database will live, and we have all of the columns that will be in our database. If we don't have any questions, we will speed right along. So the next big thing we want to do is actually set up our database when we create, when we spin up the app. Let's see. Ballistic Supernova asks, what is the SQLite 3 extension to the file? Yeah, this just tells us that this file is a SQLite 3 database. That's all. It actually is not required that it has that extension. You could give it, you could say .db if you wanted, but .SQLite 3 makes it very clear what we're using. Yeah, actually, yeah, this is a great point. Is that if you wanted to, you could say .db and that would work. I think it's just kind of a preference of standards. SQLite 3 makes it very clear this is the version we're working with, but it is not a requirement. Adam's over here still repping Access DB, Microsoft Access, I guess, which I've been told is not a great database, but I couldn't say. So we have our path, and that's just a variable up here, a global variable. But whenever our app starts off, we actually want to make sure that that database is already set up. Because if it's not set up, we actually want to create it. And what we could do is we can scroll down to the bottom here, inside this function, or inside this conditional. And remember, this is something that runs when we actually invoke our script directly. If this script got imported by another script, it wouldn't run. But when we say Python3 app.py, this will execute, and it'll actually kick off our app. So this is a great place to put some additional logic. So what we're going to want to say is we're going to want to, we're going to want to connect to the database. We're going to get a cursor. And a cursor is just a specific instance that we can use to interact with our database. And then the last thing we'll say is if a message table doesn't exist, create it. So that's going to kind of be our roadmap there. So the first thing we want to do is connect to our database. Because our database in this case is a file, literally this means opening up your file. We won't actually do that though, because SQLite 3 does that for us. We'll scroll up to this, I think it's line 30, where we say functions for changing state. And we'll hit return a few times and write a new function called dbconnect. So we'll just say def dbconnect. And what this is going to do is it is going to accept a path to a SQLite database file. And we'll say db path equals default path. And what this does is says that you can override this and pass your own path, but by default, it'll get passed in this default path. And so then basically what we want to do in our function is create a connection, which opens up that this is kind of equivalent to a file pointer in Python. And then we just want to return that connection. So this will actually just be just fine for us. And we can grab that function name and under connect to the database. We can say dbconnect and assign the output to this variable connect or con. Actually, you know what? We're not paying by the character. Let's call it connection. That is, I would say, a better variable name. We've connected to our database. The next thing we want to do is to get a cursor. And that basically just means an instance that we can actually use to run queries on the database. This is just a quick vocab lesson, is that generally speaking, a command we run against a database is called a query. That is why SQL, structured query language, is named the way it is. But a query, while it sounds like it's kind of asking for something, that query also could be something that that adds some data or that sorts the data in a particular way. So query is just a general word for running a command on our database. So what we're going to do is then, with that connection, do dot cursor to get a cursor object. Boom. We have a cursor, and now we can execute a command. So with our cursor, we can just say execute. Now, this is where we actually introduce a whole other programming language. This is something that I would actually throw out, is that if you're going to deal with the database, you are likely actually just going to want to look up some documentation. So you might say SQLite 3 documentation. Boom. Let's see. Let's look at some documentation. Oh, that's where we are. Overview of documents. You know, really, I think we want. Yeah, I appreciate that. Well, honestly, that's a that board game notification is something that I've gotten for like 2 years. I don't think I've ever gone to it. I play board games other times, but not then, not now. Good call. Yeah, so this will show us the Python interface. We also are looking for just like maybe, I don't know, maybe, no, that's the C++. So this shows us kind of a lot of what we've been doing just now. What we actually want is to look at the structured query language itself. So actually, maybe a better search we could do is SQL create table if it doesn't exist. Boom, Stack Overflow, our friend. Yeah, I think something like W3 schools for SQL. I'll actually just pull that up. So this is just in general. In general, most SQL languages are actually going to be pretty similar, such that you can like learn SQL and most of it generalizes. Sometimes things will be a little bit different between MySQL and SQLite and Postgres, but usually they're actually pretty similar. So this is actually a great resource just to get exposed to the query language itself. Let's see. Sachi asked, "What is the max we can store?" And that is a great question. The best answer is it just depends on how big a computer you're running it on, right? This is a file, and just in the same way that if you have a bunch of files on your laptop, eventually it fills up. You can keep adding files or make them as big as you want. This is also a case where different databases have different constraints. So SQLite is not going to be the best database for large amounts of data, right? If you are trying to store terabytes, petabytes of data, SQLite is not going to be your best bet. If you are trying to store megabytes or a few gigabytes of data, in that case, SQLite is pretty good. This gets into kind of the specifics of trade-offs of different databases that we can visit at the end a little bit, but we're going to charge ahead here. So I have written this SQL query that I'm just going to copy and paste, and then we can talk through it. And this is a SQL query to create a table if it doesn't exist. We'll say create table if not exists. And we can walk through kind of some basics of SQL if you're interested. But it is something that mostly you Google, hey, how do I do this thing in SQL? And you find something that's a good answer. So if we go back to Stack Overflow, basically this right here, create table if not exists. Or we could just look for, how do I create a table? SQL create table. And boom, W3 schools. Okay, so you see create table, table name, column 1 data type, column 2 data type, etc. So let's walk through our create table command. So we say, if it doesn't already exist, create a table called message. We're going to have 5 columns in there. We have ID. That is, right now, we're just going to go through the first 2 statements here. We have ID, and it's going to be an integer. We have username, and it's going to be a string. We have color, and that's also going to be a string. We have creation time, that's going to be a timestamp, and we have text, and that's going to be a string. On top of that, you can add these annotations to columns in SQL. So we have our ID column, and we're able to say this thing called primary key that is, in a lot of cases, helpful to set. It just means that if you are looking for a message, you can identify it by its primary key. This primary key is always going to be unique. That's basically what it guarantees. The way that we actually implement that is we use this thing called auto increment. So this basically says, if you do not supply an ID, we'll take the most recent highest ID and just add 1 to it. So the ID for our first message will be 0. The ID for our second message will be 1. The ID for our third message will be 2. You get the picture. The other really common one is not null. This basically just says you cannot insert a row without defining this column. So we actually are able to insert a row without an ID because we'll just auto increment. We'll automatically get the next highest ID, and that's fine. but you can't insert a message without a username. That's something that we're enforcing. The other kind of interesting annotation here is when we create our timestamp column, we say default current timestamp. This is super helpful, and it just says make the timestamp whatever time it was when you inserted this into the database. This is something you'll see is really, really common, that creation time is just the default of the current timestamp when it gets created. Oh, yes, this is another great point brought up by Adam, is that oftentimes you will see keywords in SQL spelled in all caps. There are rare cases where certain SQL interpreters actually require this, but this is a newsflash, y'all. You don't have to. You can type your keywords in lowercase and it works just fine. And I think it looks a lot better. This is something we can have a conversation about. Some people will say, oh no, it's easier to read, or it's more obvious what's going on if you use caps. So like an example here is, here they say create table in all caps and then table name is lowercase. But we're not doing that. We're just making everything lowercase. The other point that I'll bring up is table naming. People have written many articles about how you should name your tables in SQL. One big point here is that some people would say, oh, don't name your table message. It's not a single message. You should name your table messages, right? There's a thing that you will come across in computer science literature called the element of least surprise, where you want to do something that is kind of maximally obvious to anybody who is familiar with the system. One problem with naming your table, the plural of it, is that especially if you're programming in English, which like most of the time a lot of people are, pluralization is messy as hell. It's not fun. It's not easy. A lot of times you just add an S, but like, what if I'm a biologist and I'm writing a project where I'm storing a database where I'm measuring, I go and I find an octopus and I take measurements on it and I put it into a table, right? And then I measure another octopus and I put it into a table, right? I put it in the same table. What do I call this table? Do I call it octopuses? Do I call it octopi? I have no friggin' clue, right? So my sort of element of least surprise approach is that you should always name your table whatever the singular of the thing you're putting in the table is. So if you have a table that you're inserting messages into, title that table message, because that is how you refer to a single row of that table. That is kind of my own little philosophy. I think a lot of people kind of agree with that, but some people will pluralize it. So you might see a table called messages. You might see a table called octopuses. You might see a table called octopi. I don't know. But I would recommend kind of doing yourself a favor and being simple about it. We have a question: are table names columns case sensitive? No. For the most part, most SQL, and this is something that I call it, that actually every SQL interpreter is different, and they are allowed to enforce whatever they want. But for the most part, they will not be case sensitive. Although we can test that later, just to make sure I'm not telling you lies. We can see if it breaks if I change the casing. Alrighty, so at this point, we have set up a database, and we have made sure that the table exists in our database. And if the table doesn't exist, we create it. At this point, we could just run it again and see if it works. Oh, whoops, OS is not defined. Okay, we use OS right here to create our default path. So we can just also import OS. Now let's try running that again. Ooh, okay. Now we have operational error. Auto increment is only allowed on an integer primary key. Okay, so this is a case where maybe it is whining that I called it int and not integer. Let's see if that fixes it. Okay, interesting. So this SQL interpreter did not like int, but it liked integer. So this is something that reading the documentation on your SQL interpreter is great. And also oftentimes when you're writing SQL, there may be a little bit of trial and error. But I can enter a message here. Sweet. Now, no, we're not actually using our database yet, because all of the actual getting and setting of messages is still handled in our double-ended queue that we set up right here. or our queue. But we're not getting any errors, and that was kind of a good reality check there. So we can kill our app again, and we can continue onward. So in order to use our database, really there are going to be two big changes we need to make. We need to, when we store a message, actually store it in the database. And when we try to get all of our messages, we need to actually get them from the database, right? Getting and setting. Or actually, another term I'll throw out there is CRUD, which is an acronym for create, read, update, and delete. This is, you'll often hear people talk about CRUD apps, which is basically just an application that allows you to kind of add new data, read the data that you wrote earlier, update that data, and delete it. I will throw the acronym CRUD in there because that's fun, right? So in this case, we'll be implementing a create, where we can create new messages, and a read, where we can read new messages. And we actually already have the functions that we need. We have insert new message, and we have get recent messages. So the first one we're going to want to update is this insert new messages to, instead of inserting them into our double-ended queue, we actually want to insert it into our database. So just like before, we actually need to do this db connect and grabbing a cursor so we can interact with it. And so we will grab those. Boom. And inside insert new messages, we'll just paste that. And so we are connecting to the database, getting a connection, and we are pulling a cursor out of that database. Great. And now we're going to want to execute another query. We'll say cursor.execute, like before. And now we actually want to do a different kind of command. Earlier we did create table. And this time we're actually going to want to do what's called an insert command. So we could search SQLite insert into table. Great. It probably is a great one on W3 as well. Okay, awesome. This is exactly what we want. We see insert into table, where table's our table name, and then we have the names of the columns, and then we say values, and we have all of our actual values. So what we can do is we can say insert into, Kirsten's calling me. I'm sorry, Kirsten, I can't accept. Insert into messages, and popping back at our documentation, we have an open parens and multiple columns, and then values, and we insert all of our values. In fact, I'll just copy that over. Boom. And we can say, because really the things that we care about inserting, if we scroll back down, ID gets auto-incremented for us. Creation time defaults to the current timestamp. And so that leaves username, color, and text as the three that we care about inserting ourselves. So we can go scroll back up to our new method. Where are you? Oh, yes, here we go. And so we really just want to insert username, color, message. And then we want to insert our things. So one thing that we could use here is a templated string in Python. So we can say, actually, format. And we can say, if this is going to be our username, this is going to be our color, and this is going to be our, oh wait, text. That's what that is. Text. And we can format and just say username equals username, which we're getting from our function signature. We can say color equals color, and we can say, oh, why are you autocorrecting? I don't want that. And then we can say text equals text. Great. And now we should actually be able to remove this now that we're inserting into our database. We have an extra. There we go. Do we have any questions about this query here? Is this capiche for everybody? So this is now using our database to create our messages. But we're still using get recent messages. We're using our deck to try to pull them. So if we restart this, I would expect that we won't get any errors when we write, but our messages shouldn't show up. Oh, we did actually get an error. Let's see. Near floof. Floof. Execute. Okay. Let's kill our app and see what's going wrong. In insert new message. New message, we're getting our connection. We are formatting our username, color, and text. Let's see, we have some new comments. Oh yes, I can fix that space there for you, Adam. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see, the error on this is not great, or the error message is not super telling. Let's read that again. In insert new message, we have a SQL operational error near floof. Okay, so what that probably means is that inside our values, are, for whatever reason, throwing errors. One thing we could imagine trying is putting our values inside quotes. That could be helpful. Let's see if that does us any good. Okay, sweet. And let's say hello. Oh, no such table. Okay. That's a good error message. No such table messages, because we named our table message, because element of least surprise. Congrats, I played myself. All right, now let's kill this and try one more time. Actually, we're going to keep trying until it works. So let's try posting it. Okay, great. So we don't get any errors, but it doesn't show up for us. That is because while we are in our CRUD acronym, we're creating in our database, but we're still trying to read from our old queue, and so we'll have to change that over. Ballistic Supernova mentions that the first value was ID, and if we scroll down, we can see that when we create our database or when we create our table, we do go ID, username, color, creation time, and text. The key thing here is that both the ID and the creation time don't have this not null, and they actually have sensible default values. So our ID is just going to auto increment, so it's just going to count up from 1, and our timestamp is going to default to current timestamp. Whereas username, color, and text, we specifically say you cannot be null. So those are the 3 that we have to make sure that we include there. So this is great. We are able to write messages to the database, we think, and we are now on our way to reading from the database as well. So that'll be our next step here, is that under get recent messages, instead of pulling from the queue, we want to select from our table. So thinking about what we want here, really we want to select everything from our messages table, from our message table, and we want to get the newest stuff at the top. So something we could say is select all columns and order oldest timestamps first. And I know how to write this query, but we are kind of following along. So let's see. Let's see if this gives us something good. Okay, so this is good. 7 most recent timestamps sorted oldest first. Oh wait, really we want the youngest first. Order youngest first. Let's see. Or really something we could look for is selecting from a table. And then we could look at ordering. We could look for ordering in a second. So select statement. We can simply just say select column 1, column 2 from our table name. Great. It also says that if we want to get everything, we could just use the star. And so that is something, because we want all of the data from this table, we'll just use star. So we will hop in here into our get recent messages. We'll actually just clear out everything we wrote before. We will say, actually, we'll just copy this code because we want to do the same. Really, we'll copy the whole thing because we want to connect to the database, we want to get a cursor, and we want to execute a query. But that query we want to execute is going to be different. And we can remove that format as well. So they said we can say select star from message, and that should get us all of the messages. Once we execute a command, we actually need to do something that's called fetch all. So we can say this is our query execution, and assign the output of this execution. And then what we want to do is we actually want to say query execution dot fetch all. And this will just get us all of the results from there. And what we're going to want to do is maybe we could assign that to a variable called results. Boom. Hi, Andrew C. Welcome. I don't know if you've been here and if you've been listening, or if this is jumping in. If so, welcome. I hope you can hope you can glean something from the latter half here. We really are in the home stretch to finishing implementing our database. So now that we have our results, we're actually going to want to iterate through all of our results. So we can say for message row in results. And we'll create a message that is basically just a dictionary. Okay, Ballistic Supernova, you're ahead of me. This is something that we're gonna touch on in a second. So like, hold on. Yes, we're getting there. I have made a grave mistake that we will identify in a second. Well, hopefully pretty quick. Yeah, we're getting to the end of the second hour here, so I don't want to be going for too long. I want to leave everyone wanting more, you know. But we will now iterate through our message columns, and we'll basically in our message row just line up our first column with our first value in our row with our first column, and then create a dictionary based off of that. And then we can actually, before this loop, say messages equals just like an empty list. And then at the very end here, we can say messages.append message. And now at the very end here, we can say return messages. Boom. Now, there are two other things we want to add to this query. One is that we actually want to order it by timestamp. So we can actually use a command or a syntax that is order by, and we can use the creation time that is the column we want to order by. And we want to use this keyword desc, D-E-S-C, which just means descending. By default, SQL is going to order upwards, so it's going to go from 0 climbing higher. But we actually want, because the newest timestamp is going to be the highest one, it's going to be the largest number. We actually want to order it descending to go backwards in time and get the newest stuff first. The last thing we want to add is that we actually want to limit it to 100. And so we can actually say here is just say limit 100. Now we can save this and see if we have any issues. We will kill our old database. We will invoke it again. And we will say hello. Oh no, it's not showing up. Okay. How are we going to debug this? Something we could do is actually just print out all of our messages to the log, just to see if we're actually getting any messages. So we can say print messages. And I suspect we will not see any messages. So we can enter in a message. And we're seeing this empty string here. It's an empty list. We're not seeing any messages. The problem is, remember earlier I said this database is just a file? We actually need to write back to our file when we make a change. And the way that we do that is with a .commit statement. So we can actually say up here when we're writing a new message, connection .commit. And now we actually should store it in the database. So if we restart and we say, hello, now you can actually see this list has a message in it. We have our ID of 1, we have our username, Happy Doggo, we have our color, we have our creation time, and we have the text hello. Oh, excellent. And now Chonky Doggo is joining in. We're seeing that, that as well. Now I'm going to kill this. Oh, and I'm going to actually remove this print statement because it's clogging up our logs. I'll save that and we'll restart it. And we can refresh. And look at there, friends, we have our old messages. That's exciting. This is really fun. We are now actually writing all our messages to a database. So when we restart and start it back up, we actually have all that old data. I think Lit Doggo is Michelle Obama. Michelle, is that you? Okay, so this is interesting. Is when we restart, it seems like we're getting new IP or new usernames, which is very interesting. That's something that I think is another session of debugging and checking out why it is changing our usernames. But not something we'll get into here. Someone mentioned this, that there is actually one big issue here. And in as quick a period of time as I can, I'm going to talk about SQL injection. So we have all of our beautiful data here, and we want to keep all this, right? We want to keep all of our data safe from attackers. Has anyone ever heard of SQL injection? Okay, this is actually like hardcore cybersecurity, and it's an exploit that actually works way more than it should. The idea is that we're taking that input, the user's text, and we are actually taking that text, putting it exactly into our SQL query, and we're executing that query. So we are kind of saying your text will be part of code that we run in this execute command. And so a SQL injection attack happens where you actually put SQL code into that text that we insert into our statement. So this is something that would be fun to try. I actually haven't tried this yet, but what if we said, the text that we want to insert is actually, hello. I wonder if some default sanitation is going to happen. So we could imagine like, hello, end quote, end parents, semicolon. And then we could say drop table message. And then we could say, I don't know, select star from message where ID or where username equals, and then that's just going to close with that, and then we'll have a parents there. We could say open parents, and then that. Now, my assumption is that there will actually be some URL encoding that actually doesn't make this work. But I'm interested. Oh, look at that! We got an internal server error. That's pretty exciting. Okay. So if we scroll down, we actually can see it says you can only execute one statement at a time. This is actually a security thing because it stops what I was doing. But I was able to get a server error, and that might have created some noise for people. So that is our attempt at a SQL injection. Now, if you were perhaps maybe a little bit clever, you could think of some way of getting around this, maybe with a subquery or something like that. This is some other SQL nonsense. But as I believe it was Ballistic Supernova mentioned, there actually is a way of getting around this, and this is with templating. So the way we can think about templating is just saying to SQL, I'm going to give you a value, and it is just a value. It should be doing no logical work in SQL. It should just be something that ends up in a row, in a column, in a table somewhere. And the way that we do that is with a question mark. So this is question mark for the first templated value, question mark for the second, and a question mark for the third there. And now what we can do is, actually it's just the second parameter to execute. So we can just do a comma after that statement, and then just do a tuple here. And we don't actually need those equal signs because we're not passing arguments. They're just values. Boom. So now we're going to template in username, color, and text in a smart way that sanitizes our data, essentially. So earlier when we put in that quotation mark into that funky stuff, it gave us that error. Now if we do that again, we actually shouldn't get that error. So we can save this. We can restart our Flask server. As always, we still have, oh, I refreshed. Let's see, is it still running? Python app.py. Great. I should be able to refresh this. Okay, I get all my stuff. And now, what if I put in that same kind of malicious thing? Oh, and look at that. Now it actually just goes through. It doesn't break anything. It doesn't mess with our server because we sanitized it. No one can mess around with our database and try to do SQL injection. There are lots of other different security vulnerabilities, and SQL injection is not the one thing you have to worry about, but it is actually like a big thing. I think there's some stat that it's like until like 2005, like a 90% of cybersecurity issues were just SQL injection. So that is kind of the cherry on top. We have implemented our database. We started building an app. We saw a specific issue with our app, which was when we take down our server, all of our data goes away. We used the database to fix that problem because we had our problem first. And then once we had a database, we found out a way to kind of beef up the security by sanitizing the data that goes into it. That's kind of a broad overview. Y'all have been troopers. I want everyone to kind of just give themselves a pat on the back because we just covered a lot, a metric heck ton, if you will. And I'm super proud of you. If you've followed along even just vaguely, you have probably processed a lot of information at this point. So on that note, I'll do a little bit of an outro on databases, kind of linking back to this idea of, having your problem first, and then we can jump into kind of a Q&A about this, and then a general Q&A if you have questions for me about working at Google, about Google Cloud, about databases, about interviewing for jobs. If you want my LinkedIn, all of these are things we can kind of touch on if you want more Kalimba, we can do all these things. But so kind of to close out this content on databases, as I said at the beginning, I think one of the things that makes databases confusing is that people want to make you use their database, and they assume that you have already faced the problem that their database is supposed to solve. And I think that is like going about it just backwards, right? The first thing you need to do is actually try to build something and face the problem that you're going to run into. So in our example, it was taking down a server means we lose all our data. Once you have that problem, then you can actually go and look for tools that solve that, right? If you Stack Overflowed, hey, why am I losing all my data when my server shuts down? Probably people will tell you, oh, you probably ought to be storing your data in a database. So that's kind of my whole rant about it being really helpful to try to build something and actually face the problem before you go looking for solutions or before someone tries to give you a solution. So that's on databases. I will open it up to the group if we have any questions. If we have any questions about databases, any questions about the world if you want to know what I'm drinking in my cute MLH cup, or if you just want to hear some more kalimba music, or if we have additional questions about the app that we built. I know someone mentioned thinking about building a personal chat app and what that would look like, and we can talk about that. Okay, personal chat application. So go into detail. What do you want your personal chat app to do? What does this look like? Do you is the idea that you can send a personal message to someone else? Okay, yeah. Yes, so this is a great question. So a big problem with a lot of applications is what we call identity and authentication. So this is actually like logging into something and having your secure portal. That's a big topic, and I'm actually not going to dive into it. Like, there are lots of tools to do this. There are a lot of other things, but I think that something that's helpful is that IP address is not a great replacement for this, but you can kind of think of it as a replacement, right? You can think of your IP address like your phone number or your username or both. So let's pretend like IP addresses were secure, right? So you can imagine when you want to send a message, instead of just a form here, or instead of one space here, you could actually have message and then another field that is IP address or username or something like that, or phone number. And when you send that message in, you would get this SQL statement. You would store kind of, instead of just username, color, and text, you would probably store sender username and receiver username. Then when you go to get recent messages, what you would probably do is something very similar to select this, but then you would also use a where clause. And so you might say where sender username is equal to, and then parameterize in the current user's username. And so then you can get a list of all of the messages just to this one user. And then you can imagine when you see that, oh my goodness, thank you for reminding me. Y'all, I need to be more conscientious about when y'all can see my screen. Thank you, Adam, saving me. So you might do something like this with our original query to get messages, but you would just say where sender username equals, and then you parameterize in sender username. That is kind of like from a database's perspective, and I kind of totally ignored the kind of security and authentication, right? Like, using an IP address as like authentication is a really, really insecure thing to do because it's really easy to spoof IP addresses. But so you can imagine that your database gets a little bit beefier. You add both a sender and a receiver. And that when you log on as a receiver, you just see all of those ones that are from you. You can also imagine adding in when you want to look at your messages, right? Imagine you have a little DMs button, and that actually shows you a list of all the people who have sent you messages, right? So you could, instead of selecting all, you could just say select sender username. Probably get rid of this timestamp stuff. So you could say sender username for message, and then you could say where receiver username equals, call that receiver username, and then we could actually say group by sender username. So this would get you the kind of unique list of all of the people who have messaged you. You could then imagine clicking on that button and then getting pulled up another SQL query that says select all the messages where this is the sender and you are the receiver. That is like a super broad overview, kind of focused on the SQL you would write. There is, when it comes to app development, there are a lot of things to learn. There's lots of different things to juggle. You'd probably have multiple different HTML templates for different views in your app. You probably then have different, back in our Flask app, you would have different routes, right? You might have one route that is like list conversations. and then you might have another one that is conversation, and then it is sender, right? So like just shows your conversation with the sender. Obviously, as I mentioned before, this example is like specifically tuned to be like simple and only require 2 files to understand. But that is maybe a bit going into how you'd think about expanding this to have DMs or personal messages. If you have follow-up questions, we could talk. You also could message me on LinkedIn. Oh yeah, I'll post the link to my LinkedIn. I know it got posted earlier, but I will throw it in there. I also mentioned this, but you can find me on the internet at most places, just at WLifford. In most places, my content will not be technical, but you're free to follow me. Okay, if we have any other questions, I will respond to them. Otherwise, I will play us out one last time on Kalimba. All right, friends. Thank you so much for spending what is my evening with me. This was a lot of fun. I think that hacking away on simple projects like this is a really, really great way to learn how to build things. And so I hope that you learned something. I will send out, I will actually, if you grab my repo, that WLifford, here, I'll post it again, Turnip, I will upload the changes that make the database work here. So you can kind of grab the full code there. If you have any other questions, I will stick around just for another minute or two and we can chat. But otherwise, thank you so much for being here. This was a blast. And yeah, y'all did great. Happy Tuesday. Good night, Sachi. You are so welcome. Thank you all so much for your really thoughtful questions and engagement, and sticking with it. The perseverance does not go underappreciated. Adam, you cannot have a kitchen tour. Here's a way I should have promoted myself. I have another one of these coming up, where I'm actually going to be talking about something even nerdier, which is benchmarking. Let's see. I think it is the 19th. Let me see if I have a link to share. I might not. But if you come next time, I will give you a kitchen tour. I could zoom in really far and show you how I make an espresso. That could be fun. Maybe instead of Kalimba, we do kitchen tour next time. Benchmarking is fun. So benchmarking is actually, in addition to a lot of other things, it is one of the things that I do most at work. I actually competitively benchmark different clouds. And so it'll be fun. I'll get to kind of show you what I do at work a little bit next time. We will benchmark our own laptops, and then we will also benchmark the cloud. And that should be a good time. Let's see. Yes, benchmarking everything is 6 p.m. PST on the 19th of March. So don't miss it. Alrighty. If we have any other questions, I'll stick around for just a few more seconds. Otherwise, it is 8:02 for me, and so I will let y'all go until next time. Hey, I will see you there, Adam. All right, friends. Thank you so much for being here. It was super fun, and happy Tuesday.